If you thought the biggest war in modern rap history was officially over, if you honestly believed the smoke had cleared, the ink had dried, and every soldier in this conflict had marched home to count their money in peace, then one man just strolled into a Los Angeles radio studio and shattered that illusion with a single sentence. Because during what was supposed to be nothing more than a routine album promo run, a West Coast legend looked into the camera, calm as you please, and casually admitted that 3 separate versions of the most talked about record on his brand new album actually exist. 3. And buried inside at least one of those versions is a verse from the biggest pop star on the planet, a verse that was apparently so dangerous, so reckless, so potentially radioactive, that it had to be surgically removed from the song before the public ever heard a single second of it. And the explanation he gave for removing it? For words that the entire culture is going to be dissecting for weeks. He said he did it to protect the coast. Protect the coast. Let that marinate for a second. Because by the time we are done here today, you are going to understand why that little statement might be the most accidentally revealing thing anybody has said about this entire saga in over a year, why it basically confirms everything the streets have been whispering behind closed doors, and why the man he claims to be shielding might actually be the one person in this story who needs the shield the most. This is not an interview anymore. This is a confession wearing a promo run's clothes. And that is just the first bomb. Because in the very same conversation, this man also claimed he personally raised the Boogeyman, yes, that Boogeyman, the one sitting on the throne of the entire genre right now, and on top of that, a behind-the-scenes war just spilled into public view over why the biggest star in the world could not spare 2 seconds to post the album of his most loyal soldier. We are covering all of it. Every layer. Every receipt. But before we go any further into this, let me ask you something real quick. If you believe Kendrick Lamar is the undisputed king of the West Coast right now, and if you believe loyalty is supposed to be a 2-way street instead of a 1-way dead end, then you are exactly where you are supposed to be. Do me one favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tap the notification bell, because the way this story keeps growing new heads, there are going to be sequels to this video and you do not want to miss a single one of them. So here is what happened. Over the weekend, the game pulled up to the cruise show on Real 92.3 in Los Angeles, and shout out to the cruise show by the way, a crew that came up under the legendary Big Boys neighborhood before branching off and building their own lane, which is its own success story worth respecting. Game was in the building to talk about Documentary 3, his brand new album, the latest chapter in the series that turned him into a household name almost 2 decades ago. And naturally, the conversation drifted toward the record everybody has been arguing about since the moment it touched streaming. No Brakes. Now, if you have been following this rollout at all, you already know the basics. No Brakes was the lead single, released roughly 12 hours before the album dropped, and it arrived carrying what can only be described as a phantom feature. Drake is on the song. Technically. His name is attached to it, his voice floats through it, but the contribution is so light, so minimal, so clearly mailed in from another area code, that fans have spent days joking that it is a hologram feature. He is there, but he is not really there. Hold on to that detail, because it is going to matter a whole lot more in a few minutes than it did all last week. Because sitting on that couch, in front of those microphones, Game decided to volunteer information that nobody in that room pressed him hard enough to expect. He confirmed, on record, that the version of No Brakes living on the album right now is not the original. It is not even the second draft. According to Game himself, there are about 3 different versions of this song floating around in existence, and some of those other versions were, in his own words, not too kind. Things were said on those recordings that he felt obligated to pull. He told the room he altered the album heavily, that he stripped certain things out on purpose, also the conversation around the project would be about music instead of mess. And then came the question that flipped a standard press stop into headline news. He was asked, point blank, whether the material he removed was cut to protect certain individuals. And Game, choosing every word with the precision of a man who knew exactly what he was doing, answered that maybe it was to protect the coast as a whole. He said he wanted to deliver an album full of music with no beefs attached to it. He even leaned forward and insisted he is not dissing a single soul on this project, before immediately, in the very next breath, admitting there are a few references on there that people can take and twist into whatever narrative they want. Let us slow all the way down on that number for a second, because 3 versions is not a small detail. 3 versions is a whole story by itself. See, every song you have ever loved went through drafts. Hooks get rewritten, mixes get adjusted, verses get tightened. That is normal. That is Tuesday in the studio. But 3 distinct versions of one record, with entire verses from the biggest artist on earth getting lifted in and out like furniture being rearranged, that is not a mixing decision. That is an editorial decision. That is somebody sitting in a studio, hearing something come out of those speakers, and making a judgment call that what they just heard could not be allowed to exist in public. Verses do not disappear because of audio quality. Verses disappear because of content. So before we even get to what was said on that couch, understand that the most honest moment of the entire weekend might have been a number 3. Somebody recorded something, and somebody else decided the world was better off never hearing it. And consider the man at the center of that decision, because the context makes it heavier. Game is not some rookie trying to squeeze a headline out of a slow news week. This is an artist whose first documentary album helped define an entire era of West Coast music over 20 years ago, a man who has forgotten more about this industry than most of today's chart toppers will ever learn. Documentary 3 was supposed to be a victory lap. A legacy statement. The 3rd chapter of the series that made him, arriving at a moment when his coast is sitting on top of the entire music world. That is what this album should have been about. Instead, every single headline coming out of its release week is about what is not on it. The verse that is not there. The post that did not come. The side he will not pick. When the absence of things becomes the story of your album, that is not an accident. That is gravity. And whether Game wants to admit it or not, he is orbiting a moment that belongs to somebody else. Then there is the Phantom feature itself, which deserves its own autopsy. A decade ago, a verse from Drake was the closest thing this business had to a cheat code. It was a kingmaker, a cosign that moved units and minted careers overnight. Artists restructured entire rollouts around the arrival of one of those verses. And now look at where we are. The most loyal public defender the man has, an artist who absorbed real public embarrassment on his behalf, who skipped the biggest cultural moment in his own city's history out of solidarity, and what did that loyalty purchase? A hook. A light, floating, minimally committed hook, delivered roughly 12 hours before the album went live, followed by total silence when the project actually dropped. The feature itself became a story about everything except music. Nobody is debating the melody. Everybody is debating the meaning. And just look at the timeline of this rollout, because it tells you everything. The single lands less than a day before the album, which is a pressure cooker strategy designed to manufacture maximum conversation in minimum time. The featured artist says nothing. The album drops. The featured artist says nothing. 48 hours later, the album's owner is sitting on a radio couch casually revealing that multiple unreleased versions exist, including verses that were too hot to handle. Now, either this is chaos, which is possible, or this is chess, which is smarter. Because if it is chess, then nothing about this weekend was unplanned. The interview was not a promo stop. It was a controlled release of information, calibrated to the syllable, designed to make you ask exactly the questions we are about to ask. Keep both of those possibilities in your back pocket, because everything else you are about to hear only fully makes sense if you do. Now, if your eyebrows just hit the ceiling, good. They are supposed to. Because what Game just laid out, whether he intended to or not, is a cover story with a hole in the middle of it the size of downtown Los Angeles. Think about the logic for 1 second. He says there is no dissing on the album, but admits there are references people can run with. He says he removed verses to keep the focus on music, but the only way removing a verse keeps peace is if that verse was declaring war. And he says he did it all to protect the coast, which sounds noble, sounds selfless, sounds like a general falling on a grenade for his city, until you ask the one question that breaks the entire story open. A question so simple it is almost embarrassing. And we are going to ask it right now. What exactly does the coast need protecting from? Seriously. Run the tape back on the last 2 years and tell me what threat is currently bearing down on the West Coast that requires a veteran rapper to personally intercept a Drake verse like a Secret Service agent diving in front of a limousine. Because the last time anybody checked, the West Coast is not under attack. The West Coast is holding the trophy. Kendrick Lamar did not just win the battle, he won the war, the peace talks, and the victory parade. He got the biggest song of the year. He turned a diss record into a stadium anthem that grandmothers were chanting at family reunions. He packed out the forum for the pop-out and turned it into a coronation. He dropped GNX out of the sky with zero warning and watched it swallow the charts whole. Then he walked onto the Super Bowl stage, the single biggest stage in American entertainment, and performed the victory lap in front of over 100 million people. The coast is not in danger. The coast is in a dynasty. So if the coast does not need protection, who does? Who benefits from that verse disappearing into a vault? Who was actually standing in the blast radius of whatever was said on those other two versions? You already know the answer, and deep down, so does Game. The coast never needed a shield. Drake needed a shield. And what Game dressed up as an act of regional loyalty starts to look, under even the softest light, like an act of personal protection for the one man on the record. Protect the coast is a beautiful slogan. But strip the paint off and it reads a whole lot more like protect the friend. Or maybe, if we are being brutally honest, protect the investment. And here is where it gets even more interesting, because there is a second theory floating around that Game did not say out loud but absolutely did not rule out either. 3 versions of a song do not just sit on a hard drive collecting dust. Not in this economy. Not in an attention economy where a whispered Drake verse is worth more than gold. Think about it strategically. You drop the album with the clean version. You let the interview circuit do its job, let the blogs chew on the mystery, let the fans argue about what was said and who it was aimed at. The hype builds, the hype peaks, the hype starts to cool off, and right at the exact moment the conversation begins to die down, what a coincidence, the original version leaks. Or better yet, the remix drops. Suddenly the album has a second life, a third life, a whole extra news cycle, and all it cost was patience. If that is the play, and it would not be the first time a rollout was engineered this way, then the verse was not deleted at all. It was deposited. And the interest on it is compounding as we speak. But the removed verse was somehow not even the boldest claim Game made in that interview. Because at one point, the conversation turned to the lines people have been picking apart on the album, and Game addressed the one that had the entire internet doing a double take. The line where he says he raised the Boogeyman. And when he was asked about it, he did not walk it back. He doubled down. He pointed out that Kendrick Lamar himself has said on record, going all the way back to early songs, that he looked up to Game, that Game's career inspired him, that Game was the one putting on for the city when Kendrick Lamar was still coming up. And Game said all of that is no cap, just transparency answering transparency. Now let us be very careful here, because words mean things, and raised is doing a whole lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. Inspiration is not upbringing. A young artist studying your blueprint is not the same as you raising him. By that logic, every rapper who ever rewound a Illmatic tape was raised by Nas, and every kid who wore out a Blueprint CD was raised by Jay-Z, and we both know that is not how the word works. Raised means something specific. Raised means you were there, in the room, in the trenches, shaping the person year after year. Think about what actual raising looks like in this industry. Birdman had Lil Wayne in his orbit from the time Wayne was 12 years old, still there into his 30s, a father figure filling a seat that life had left empty. That is raising somebody. Meeting a talented kid through a program, receiving a mixtape from a hopeful teenager, a mixtape that, by the way, according to the story that has circulated for years, never even got a response at the time, that is not raising a man. That is crossing paths with a comet before it ignited. And the beautiful irony, the part that makes this whole claim collapse under its own weight, is that Kendrick Lamar already told us the truth about that era in his own music. On Black Boy Fly, Kendrick Lamar admitted he used to be jealous of Game's position, jealous because Game was the one putting on for the city, the one holding the spot Kendrick Lamar wanted for himself. That is not a son talking about a father. That is a challenger eyeballing a throne. He did not want to be Game's protege. He wanted Game's spot. And the historical record is very clear about how that story ended. He got it. Then there is the other line, the one about the GNX scaring certain company away, and Game's explanation was honestly the most disarming moment of the entire interview. He said he owned one of those cars back in the day, all black, dark windows, and his girl at the time did not want to ride in it because it looked like trouble. Kendrick Lamar named an album GNX, so when Game said it, that is all he meant. You can take it how you want. And look, maybe that is true. Maybe it really is just a car story. Car culture is regional, it is personal, and nobody outside of Los Angeles can fully grade that homework. But here is the problem. When a man spends an entire interview insisting everything is love while simultaneously confirming he is sitting on multiple unreleased versions of a song with the most famous rival of the man he claims to have raised, the benefit of the doubt starts to run on empty. Playful lines read like placement. Coincidences read like choreography. And every denial arrives gift-wrapped with just enough ambiguity to keep the blogs fed for another week. And since we are pulling threads from that interview, there is one more exchange that deserves the spotlight, because it might be the most revealing 60 seconds of the entire sit-down. At one point, the conversation drifted toward the idea of picking a side, which, in case you have been living under a rock for 2 years, is the question that has hovered over game like a storm cloud since the moment this whole conflict ignited. And his answer was fascinating, not because of what he said, but because of where he took it. He said he does not have to pick a side. And then, out of absolutely nowhere, the man pivoted to mortality. All living things must perish, he said. Nobody in that room leaves this earth alive. He talked about never leaving Los Angeles, never changing his area code, still carrying the same 213 number he has always had. He talked about living in a city that has taken friends, family members, peers, and how he could have been one of those names on any given day of his career. Now, on one level, respect. That is a real perspective from a real person who has lived a real life, and nobody with a heart would mock a man for meditating on his own mortality. But on another level, the analyst in me has to point something out. He was asked a question about rap allegiances, and he answered with a speech about death. That is not an answer. That is a thermometer. When a man responds to a music question by reminding the room that everybody dies, he is telling you exactly how dangerous he believes this situation actually is. That is not the language of an artist discussing chart positions. That is the language of a man who believes the stakes of this conflict live somewhere far beyond streaming numbers. And whether that danger is real or perceived almost does not matter, because he clearly feels it, and that feeling is shaping every public move he makes. He also spent a portion of that interview doing something he has genuinely earned the right to do, which is positioning himself as one of the great ambassadors of Los Angeles. He talked about the foundation everybody in that city builds on, shouted out the journeys of the very hosts interviewing him, paid respect to fallen figures, and framed the West Coast as a collective project that they all constructed together, brick by brick. And you know what? That part is true. It is commendable, even. But did you notice the one name that never surfaced during that entire tribute? The foundation of the West Coast in 2026 has a name, and that name is Kendrick Lamar. The man Game is describing, the man carrying the city on the world's biggest stages, the man whose victory lap played at the Super Bowl, is the same man he claims to have raised, and somehow the only person in that conversation who never got his flowers in the moment. Every tribute Game pays to the city quietly routes around the person currently carrying it. Draw your own conclusions, but do not pretend you cannot see the shape of it. Because the history between these two makes all of this matter more, not less. Go back to the early 2010s. Kendrick Lamar was the hungry newcomer, the kid with the mixtape and the vision, handing his music to the established gatekeeper and hoping for a door to crack open. The story that has circulated for years says that tape never even got a response. Over time there were public cosigns, there were kind words in interviews, there was mutual respect displayed for the cameras, and yes, Kendrick Lamar has openly credited Game as an inspiration. Nobody is erasing that history. It is real. But inspiration and authorship are two different words with two different meanings, and the entire tension of this weekend lives in the gap between them. And that history is the lens you need for what came next, because the loudest moment of this entire saga did not happen in that radio studio at all. But if you think the radio interview was the messiest part of this weekend, you have not been paying attention to what was happening behind the curtain, because the Real explosion went down in a separate conversation entirely, and this one involves Game's longtime manager, one of the loudest platforms in the culture, and a loyalty bill that finally came due. Here is the setup. When Documentary 3 dropped, a whole lot of people noticed something strange. Drake, who is literally on the lead single, who contributed to the record the entire rollout was built around, did not post the album. Not a story. Not a link. Not a single acknowledgement that his most loyal public defender in the rap game had just released the project of his life. Nothing. Silence. And this did not go unnoticed, because a certain media personality, one of the biggest amplifiers in the entire culture and a man who has spent years carrying water for Drake at every available opportunity, actually broke character and called it out publicly. He demanded to know why Drake had not posted Game's album. And when somebody with that track record turns around and aims that kind of question at the very artist he has spent years defending, people pay attention. Game's manager Wack 100 gave his version of how it all unfolded, and the details are telling. According to Wack, the call-out went up, it started making the rounds, and he was on the phone with everybody connected to the situation. Then he wakes up midday the next day, opens his phone, and what does he see? Did Drake post Game's album? No. Drake posted a teaser for his own mysterious new venture, some fear of missing out branded something or other that to this day nobody can fully explain. Read that again. The man could not find 2 seconds to share the album of the artist holding him down, but he found time to promote himself. Wack's reaction was the same one any of us would have. He basically said Game could have pulled the ultimate move, could have shown up to the pop-out like LeBron James did, dancing in the crowd while Kendrick Lamar performed, celebrated by the city, embraced by the moment. Instead, Game held the line. He stayed away from the biggest West Coast cultural event of the decade out of solidarity. He took the visual lumps. He sat through the questions about why he was not there, got emotional on camera explaining himself, absorbed all of that public awkwardness, all of it, for a friendship. And when the bill came due on that loyalty, the payment was a teaser about fear of missing out. Eventually, days later, after the call-out had gone properly viral, Drake did post the song. And that is when the story took its most predictable turn, because the same personality who lit the match immediately sprinted away from the fire. Suddenly the tune changed to, "You cannot tell Drake what to do, everybody knows that, this is between Drake and Game, this has nothing to do with me." And then came the finale, the claim that it was actually the fans, specifically the Kendrick Lamar fans, who were out here planting seeds of division and manufacturing the whole controversy. Stop. Just stop. Rewind the tape. The Kendrick Lamar fans were not the ones asking why Drake ignored the album. They did not introduce that question into the atmosphere. The person who introduced it, the person who aimed his entire platform at it and fired, was the same man now pointing fingers at the audience. He planted the seed, watered it in front of millions of people, watched it grow into a full story, and the moment it bore fruit he did not like, he looked around and blamed the weather. If that playbook looks familiar, it should. It is the exact same sequence every time. Apply pressure until it works, take the result, then deny the pressure ever existed. And the wildest part is that it did work. The post went up. Which tells you everything about where the real leverage sits in that relationship, and it is not with the man who skipped the coronation. Now stack all of that next to what Game said on the radio about protecting the coast, and the picture sharpens into focus. You have an artist reshaping his entire album, removing verses, managing egos, absorbing public embarrassment, playing defense on every interview stop, all in service of a relationship. And on the other side of that relationship you have a man who contributed the bare minimum to the record, could not be bothered to promote it until the internet forced his hand, and responded to the whole situation by advertising himself. One side of this friendship is doing cardio. The other side is doing cardio-adjacent social media management. And somehow, we are supposed to believe the guy doing all the protecting is the one holding the power. Because Wack 100 did not stop at the album post controversy. In that same behind-the-scenes conversation, he reached back and opened up an entirely different file, the Rick Ross file, and his version of those events reframes a moment a lot of people misread in real time. According to Wack, when Game appeared to take a shot at Ross during the height of the battle, that was not Game picking a fresh opponent. That was Game doing side window smoke, jumping into a fight that was never his, positioning himself as a counterpunch for a team he was not officially on. And Wack went even further, claiming Game was sitting on personal ammunition at the time, dirt he was allegedly eager to unload the moment the right person stepped out of line. Forget whether you believe the specifics for a second and just sit with what that admission reveals about how these camps actually operate. Every conflict is leverage. Every friendship is inventory. Every quiet moment is just a loaded clip waiting for a target. That is the economy these men live in, and it explains so much about why nothing in this world ever truly ends. And speaking of stories that reframe everything, we still have not properly reckoned with the most unbelievable detail to come out of this entire period, the now legendary phone call from a fast food bathroom. For those who missed it, a former Shady Records affiliate revealed that during the peak of the battle, he was literally standing in a church's chicken restroom, talking Game off the ledge in real time, convincing him that the barrage of records flying through the culture were not aimed at him and that jumping in would be a catastrophic mistake. Game, by that account, felt targeted by nearly every song dropping, and it took a peer hiding in a chicken spot bathroom to keep him out of the blast radius. If that story is even half true, then understand what it means. Game spent the entire war one bad phone call away from diving headfirst into it, and the man who protected him from that mistake is not the man whose verse he just protected. The loyalty ledger in this story has never once balanced, and everybody involved knows it. Now zoom out and look at the machine itself, because the callout and deny cycle we watched play out this weekend is worth understanding on its own terms. A massive platform aims at a superstar and fires. The superstar, who everybody swears cannot be told what to do, quietly complies within days. Then the platform reverses field, denies the pressure ever mattered, and blames the audience for inventing the controversy. The fans get treated as both the engine and the scapegoat, the fuel and the fall guy, depending on which way the wind is blowing that hour. And through all of it, through every cycle of this exhausting merry-go-round, there is exactly one figure in the entire culture who refuses to climb aboard. Kendrick Lamar does not do callouts. Kendrick Lamar does not do clarifications. Kendrick Lamar does not do damage control, because Kendrick Lamar does not take damage. His silence has outmaneuvered more noise than any response ever could, and every week that passes makes that strategy look more prophetic. Which brings us to the part of this conversation that nobody on that side wants to have. Documentary 3, the actual album, the actual music, deserves to be judged on its own merits. A 20-plus year career has earned that much. There are records on that project that remind you exactly why this man has survived every era of this industry, and in a fair world, the rollout would be about the craft. But here is the uncomfortable truth. You cannot spend 2 years standing in front of the loudest feud in modern music, feeding it, flanking it, freelancing for it, and then act surprised when the feud is the only thing anybody wants to ask you about. That is not the media's fault. That is gravity, and Game helped build the pull he is now caught in. The coast has moved on. The culture has crowned Kendrick Lamar and thrown the parade. The only open question is whether Game can move on too, or whether the vault, and whatever is sleeping inside it, was the plan all along. And just when you think the goalposts cannot possibly move any further, they get picked up and carried into another stadium entirely, because the counterattack that came next was aimed, predictably, at Kendrick Lamar. The argument, and I am going to present it fairly before I take it apart, went like this. Why did Kendrick Lamar not shout out Mustard's solo album? Mustard produced the biggest record of the battle. Where was the post? Where was the public love? Where was the loyalty? Now, on the surface, to somebody who has not been paying attention, that might sound like a gotcha. But watch what happens when it touches reality. Mustard did not get a story post from Kendrick Lamar, that much is true. You know what Mustard got instead? He got to produce the most culturally devastating diss record of the modern era, a song so big it got performed at the Super Bowl. He got to appear in the music video. He got multiple placements on GNX, the album that swallowed the year whole. And on top of all of that, Kendrick Lamar turned Mustard's name into arguably the single loudest producer acknowledgement of the entire decade, a screamed, stadium-shaking, meme-immortal shout embedded permanently into one of the biggest songs on the album, a moment people will be yelling at concerts, in cars, and at family cookouts for the next 20 years. That is not a shout-out. That is a monument. Mustard did not get an Instagram story. Mustard got a font in the culture's permanent vocabulary. There is not a producer alive who would trade that for a repost. And notice the asymmetry they are desperate for you not to notice. On one side, you have Drake, who is literally on no breaks, a featured artist on the record, who could not bring himself to post the album until a public callout went viral. On the other side, you have Kendrick Lamar being interrogated for not promoting albums he has zero involvement in, zero features on, zero connection to whatsoever. A featured artist ignoring his own record is fine. A completely uninvolved artist minding his business is a scandal. Make that math make sense. You cannot. It was never math. It was a diversion, tossed into the conversation to pull heat away from the actual question, which is why the most loyal soldier in this entire saga keeps getting paid in silence. And this is where the whole weekend snaps into its final, undeniable shape. Because this was never really about an interview, or a verse, or a car, or a story post. This is about a pattern that has been visible for 2 years to anyone willing to look at it straight. Kendrick Lamar moves in silence and builds monuments. The pop-out did more for the careers of the artists on that stage than 1,000 shout-outs ever could, because it introduced entire names to the world in a single night, artists the global audience had never met who walked off that stage famous. That is what lifting your city actually looks like. Kendrick Lamar understood something the other side never will, which is that real power does not announce itself in captions. It announces itself in outcomes. And while Kendrick Lamar has been stacking outcomes, albums, stages, moments, movements, the other side of this story has been stacking explanations. Explanations for missing verses. Explanations for missing posts. Explanations for explanations. One camp is building an empire. The other camp is building excuses, and business, as they say, is booming. That is the real headline buried under this whole weekend. Not that 3 versions of a song exist. Not even that a verse got pulled. It is that 2 full years after the battle ended, the gravitational center of this entire culture is still one man who has not said a single word. Think about that. Kendrick Lamar gave no interview this weekend. Kendrick Lamar posted nothing. Kendrick Lamar did not respond to the Boogeyman line, did not respond to the verse revelations, did not respond to any of it, and yet every single conversation, every headline, every radio stop, every manager's phone call, every desperate deflection still orbits around him. That is not a man participating in a conversation. That is a man whose silence has become the loudest voice in the room. They say the truest measure of victory is when your name does all the fighting for you. By that measure, this thing ended a long time ago, and this weekend was just the echo. So where does it all go from here? That is the question that should keep you up tonight, because there is a loose thread in this story big enough to pull the whole sweater apart. 3 versions of No Breaks exist. We have heard one. The other 2 are sitting on a hard drive somewhere in Los Angeles right now, and every single day that passes, the value of whatever is on them goes up. If the remix theory is real, if that verse was deposited instead of deleted, then we are not watching the end of this story. We are watching the intermission. And when that recording finally surfaces, and recordings like that always surface, everything Game said on that couch about protection, about loyalty, about keeping the peace, is going to get reread in a completely different light. Remember where you heard it framed first. Now, I have to hear from you on this one. Was Game protecting the coast, or was he protecting one man and using the whole coastline as cover? Do you actually want to hear the removed verse, or is some music better left in the vault? And be honest, if the roles were reversed, if Kendrick Lamar had a hidden verse with a rival on ice, would the conversation sound anything like this? Get in the comments and let me know exactly where you stand, because I read every single one and this debate is nowhere near finished. And listen, if you made it all the way to this point in the video, you are the real ones and I appreciate you more than you know. Hit that like button on your way out, subscribe if you have not already, and share this with somebody who still thinks this saga ended in 2024. And if you want to understand how we got here, how the battle that never technically ended kept pulling new soldiers in long after the smoke cleared, check out the video on your screen right now, because the next piece of this puzzle is already waiting for you. The vault has 3 versions. We have only heard one. Stay close.